Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today I really want to talk about something that's come to my attention over really the past week regarding the top prospect in the 2022 NHL draft in Shane Wright, and quite a few people out there are starting to call him overrated, and some people as well calling for him to slip in this NHL draft. Now, of course, Shane Wright has been the unanimous first overall pick for this upcoming 2022 draft, number one at pretty much every single draft board across almost every single platform, but there are some people out there that are starting to get concerned with Shane Wright's production and his play so far in the OHL this season. But what is really happening with Shane Wright? Is there cause for concern, and is Shane Wright actually overrated? Watch till the end for all those answers and all the draft talk surrounding Wright, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 55% of the people that are watching are not subscribed. If you like hockey, this channel is the place to be. Now, this Shane Wright overrated talk first came to my attention a few days ago when one of the great viewers of this channel on the mock draft video put out a comment saying this. From DukeStorm88, they said, "I watched Shane Wright play the other day. He wasn't as good as I would have expected. He might drop." And 10 people also liked that post, which I thought was very, very interesting. And when we do look at Shane Wright in terms of the actual production so far this year, especially compared to his first year in the OHL, the production definitely has been disappointing. Now, he is still 17 as a 6'1" centerman, and even though I still have him first overall, I can see where some of the concerns are coming from. Now, this year so far in the OHL as the captain of Kingston, he has in 22 games, 11 goals, 19 assists, and 30 points. But if we compare it to the first year in the OHL, he was amazing as a rookie and was outproducing Connor McDavid. And again, this was when he was 15 years old, with 58 games played, 39 goals, 27 assists, and 66 points. He's better production-wise than he was in his first season, but not by maybe the stretch that we would have all imagined. I mean, in the World Juniors this last year, he got 14 points, 9 goals, 5 assists in 5 games played in the U18 World Juniors. He was absolutely dominant, and I think a lot of us were expecting him to get at least 100 points, but I was expecting him to honestly get around the 120-point range and be one of the best, if not the best, OHL player this season. In fact, for some people, Shane Wright hasn't even been the best player on his team. In terms of actual production, he's getting outscored by Swedish forward Lucas Edmonds, who's come into the OHL in his first season and has put up 13 goals, 27 assists, 40 points in 22 games played. Compare that to Shane Wright's 30 and Martin Chromiak's 27 in 20 games played. So in terms of actual offense, there's a real argument to be made that Shane Wright hasn't even been the best player on his team, which is a little bit concerning, especially when we're talking about Shane Wright being a generational and franchise talent. And that's kind of the label I've put on him really the past couple of years, because I expected him to be coming in the OHL this year and his technically second year and be the most dominant player, simply put. But again, OHL wide, that hasn't exactly been the case. And with Shane Wright, I think everybody was expecting him after that World Juniors to be his dominant self. But I feel like with some people that are sort of missing the point when it comes to Shane Wright, and a lot of people forget just how good of a two-way forward he is. This is a player that, even when he's not producing, still has a ton of value, and in my opinion is one of the best defensive forwards of this draft, even if that offense wasn't really coming where it maybe should have. Now, in terms of actual point scoring this year, Brandon Coe is number one in OHL scoring with 46 points. Then it goes to Shane Wright's teammate and Lucas Edmonds with 40 points in 22 games. Then you have Matt Petrov, you have Rory Cairns, you have Luke Evangelista. Shane Wright is not in that top 5, and you have to go pretty long into the OHL stats to actually find Shane Wright. When it comes to his scoring right now, he's below guys like Sasha Pashjov, Tucker Robertson, Tanner Dickinson, a lot of guys that Shane Wright, simply put, should be ahead of. So in terms of production, again, I can see where it's disappointing, but going back to Shane Wright's style of play, I still think there's so much potential there and a lot to like, even when he isn't scoring as much as he should. But now we get into a couple of tweets that are simply fascinating, and this comes from CJ Totoro, who does a lot of analytics work on a ton of different leagues throughout the hockey world, and he said this, which spurred a lot of controversy and a lot of discussion, and he said this: "Is Shane Wright perceived as an exceedingly weak first overall prospect? Because he sure looks that way on the stat sheet. 27 points in 21 games in the OHL. He's 13 points behind some dude named Lucas Edmonds for the team lead in scoring. For reference, Connor McDavid's draft year in the OHL, he put up 120 points in 47 games. And then he goes on to say in another tweet here, which I found even more fascinating, he said this. You guys aren't seeing some of it, but this has been an absolutely fascinating few hours for me. I got DM'd by 4 separate scouts after this tweet that were all over the map. I don't want to share too much, but suffice to say, there is a ton of disagreement right now. So not only did this create a ton of discussion, there was also maybe a couple of scouts out there that were kind of agreeing with what CJ is saying here, and that is extremely interesting to me. Now, again, the point he's making about production is definitely valid. Although it's now 30 points in 22 games, Shane Wright's production has been disappointing. There's no being around the bush there. He has not been scoring as much as he should, and especially when you compare it to Lucas Edmonds, let alone a Connor McDavid, it's not where it should be. Shane Wright realistically should be at least top 5 in scoring. When we look at guys like Marco Rossi over the years in the OHL, other players that have been top 10 and high picks over the OHL the past couple seasons, they have been at the top of the leaderboard in terms of scoring. There's some outliers out there like Barrett Hayton, but he hasn't exactly panned out as well as expected. So I feel like, again, the production argument is definitely there. And again, on paper, Shane Wright with his shot and offensive potential should have been much better by now, even if he is getting on a little bit of a hot streak as of this current moment. Now, let's just compare Shane Wright's production right now, 30 points in 22 games, to somebody who went 9th overall in the 2020 draft by the Minnesota Wild, has hopefully kicked COVID in the butt for good, and after being great in the AHL, has just a fantastic future with the Minnesota Wild. But this was a player that went 9th overall in the OHL, just for reference, and this player got 56 games played under him with the Ottawa 67s, 39 goals, 81 assists, and 120 points. That's the style of production that I was expecting from Shane Wright this year. Maybe a little bit more goals, maybe a more even spread, but that was what I and a lot of other people were expecting to see. That player was Marco Rossi, and that player was a dominant one that should have still gone top 6, in my opinion, in that 2020 draft. Unfortunately slipped, but it was mostly due to size. But comparing the statistics, comparing the play, I feel like Marco Rossi was a lot more of a complete player in his OHL year, especially offensively, than Shane Wright has been. And that's not a detriment to Shane Wright. He's still been fantastic, I feel like, at points, but there has been players very recently that I feel like have done better than Shane Wright has done in their draft years in the OHL. But I do think there are some comparables as well to Shane Wright. Now, the one guy that I want to kind of compare Shane Wright to, at least when it comes to draft year production and maybe expectations compared to some others, I'm going to compare not the style of play, because I think they're pretty different players, but the situations that they're actually in. I want to compare Shane Wright to Quinton Byfield. Now, again, I feel like Quinton Byfield maybe has a lot more potential physically, but I do think when it comes to Shane Wright, the situations might be a little bit more similar than a lot of people are expecting. The thing that I go back to a lot in that draft year was a lot of people were saying Quinton Byfield's production wasn't as strong as a guy like Marco Rossi or a Cole Perfetti, and that's why for some people Quinton Byfield dropped a little bit for them. But I always went back to the strength of his team, the amount of even strength points he was putting up, the potential of Quinton Byfield as reasons that I had him 2nd overall and one of the best prospects in 2020. And I kept going back to those great potential things. And when we look at Shane Wright, even though the production might not be there, it's kind of the same thing for me. The two-way game is abundantly strong when it comes to Shane Wright. He is the most complete forward of this entire NHL draft, and that's not for a bad reason. He has been putting in the work, he's had the strong work ethic, and the defensive results have shown themselves. He's incredibly smart in his own zone, knows how to get a great transition game going, his skating is fantastic, his shot is fantastic, and his awareness is at an elite level. And even though the production might not be there, I don't think it's gonna hurt him long term. I don't think it's gonna be going against him once he eventually makes the NHL, because he will, and I feel like he'll start off pretty decently because of that blueprint he's already set out for himself. He'll be a player that coaches love to play as high as they can, and he'll be put in the serious and really stressful situations. But that's what Shane Wright is able to do. He's able to lead by example, and I feel like that's a very underrated trait when we're talking about him. Yes, the production might not be there now, but it's starting to come, and on top of the defensive leadership and strong two-way game, that's still a player that I would take 1st overall any day of the week. Now, I do want to say this. I have in the past called Shane Wright generational, and now looking at that statement, I kind of do disagree with that now looking back on it. Even though Shane Wright, I still think is going to be an elite's #1 center in this league, I don't think he's quite generational, maybe as he was a couple of years back. And we're kind of maybe even seeing the same thing with Connor Bedard, who is kind of struggling a lot more in the WHL this year than he was in his first season. So there's quite a bit of maybe jumping the gun that I've done on this channel, and I do want to say sorry for that, because it feels like Shane Wright hasn't lived up to my lofty expectations that I've kind of created for myself. But these are still exceedingly young players that do deserve some level of empathy in the situations they've been. I mean, with Shane Wright, he hasn't played in the OHL for a year before this season, and that does take a lot out of the consistency that you could be having. So I do feel like that does affect Shane Wright's game, and I feel like it has up to this point. But I feel like when it comes to Shane Wright, he will still be fine. And even though he isn't going to be this generational prospect anymore, I still think he's probably the best first overall pick we've seen in the past 5 years. I mean, just looking at the actual players we've had since Matthews, we've had Hischier, we've had Dahlin, we've had Hughes, we've had Lafreniere, we've had Owen Power, and now we have Shane Wright. And I feel like looking at all those players, the only ones that really come close to me are Jack Hughes and maybe Owen Power, maybe Alexi Lafreniere, but those are maybes in my opinion. When it comes to Shane Wright, I think he will be the best first overall pick out of this group. Probably Connor Bedard will be the best out of this kind of era of first overall picks, but I feel like Shane Wright will be the best out of them all, and I still think that's a lot of praise that deserves to be on him. I think he will be a great player on day one, and again, will likely be a captain for whoever he ends up playing for. I feel like, again, it is still the tank for Shane Wright bull, but at the same time, the expectations, I think, have gotten the best of us and have gotten the best of Shane Wright as well. Now, is he 110% going to be the first overall pick? Probably not, maybe to 99% now. Is he a below average first overall pick, though? I absolutely do not agree with that with what we've seen first overall pick-wise in the last few years. I feel like Shane Wright is going to be completely fine. He's going to be fantastic for anybody that ends up getting him, and that defense, that leadership, I think brings captain qualities for whoever is going to pick him first overall. I still think we should be extremely excited for Wright, and I still feel like he'll be a dominant player in the NHL someday. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the kind of this breakdown of what's going on with Shane Wright, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. But I want to know about you guys as well. What do you guys think about Shane Wright so far this year? Are you worried about the production? What do you think of Shane Wright so far? Would you still take him first overall? Do you still think he's a slam dunk first overall pick? Do you think he's a franchise, generational, elite, or just okay first overall pick? Let me know your thoughts. Of course, comment all those thoughts down below. Share this video with your friends. Get it out there and click on all this card for all my 2022 content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.